teach. By the way, I'm Lisa, since you're new tonight, and I'm going to be doing atmospheric monitoring. So we've already talked about today why it's so important, and one of the main common denominators was atmospheric monitoring, and that's where a lot of things have failed. A lot of companies have failed people have failed people, and people have failed themselves. So who cares about you? You care about you, and nobody else cares about you the way you care about you. It's so nice when your coworkers are like, oh, he's off to the bathroom, and then he gets smashed with like 12,000 pounds of tuna and then cooked, right? So you care about you. So if you care about you, make sure you use the lockout, tagout kits, and that people know where you are and that you're on duty that day and who you're working for and where your team is. And that's for anything being said. Who cares about you? You. So when you're stuck inside a building, you care about you. So Adam had pointed out earlier that there's special wording in this. It's not your buddy-boss relationship. It's employer-employee. And so as I pulled out this, I got this from the Office of the State Fire Marshal. Anytime you guys take a class or want to learn about a class prior to taking a class, it's the OSFM on the board. That's what you type in, and then they have these lists all categorized for the class that you're taking. So you guys can pull up anything that you want to get. So I pulled up this JPR, and this is just on the atmospheric monitoring. And when I started looking at it, it says A, underneath atmospheric monitoring, it says A, prior to entry, all atmospheres shall be tested for hazards. So now this is where you're coming in with your wordings and how you need to be appropriate and how you interpret materials. So it didn't say should. Does anybody know the difference between shall and should? What does should
Shall
mean?
means you have to.
Shall means you have to, ifs, ands, or buts. Yes.
Is that like the difference between like a policy and a guideline?
Yes. Yeah, so as you're reading this stuff, like you said, this is really important. You can be fined by OSHA, you can be held liable in court. All sorts of legal problems could happen to you if you do not follow it. So the first thing that I saw there was shall, and I wanted you guys to know the difference between shall and should. And as you grow in like your medic or EMT, they'll also say shall and should when you do your testing. So if somebody says, hey, you didn't do this, you're like, I chose not to, and it's like, you shall do this every day. So start paying attention to the words of the things that you're reading. So it says, prior to entry, all atmospheres shall be tested for hazards. And as we talked about, it's anything that can be a confined space or anything that you're absolutely not sure of. And then the information gathered through testing and selecting personal protective equipment, determining areas when protection is needed, assessing potential health effects and exposure, and determining the need for specific medical monitoring. So based upon what you see, what you get, what the air conditions are like for the day, what your person is looking like who's a victim, or what crews say where you're responding to, all of those play into it. So now that you have like your scene size up and you're kind of walking in, you know you need to use a tool, and you need to use an instrument is what it's called, and it's the gas monitoring instrument. And there's a couple requirements. It's guided by Cal OSHA, and you need a real-time direct readout instrument. So real-time means actual now, not yesterday or what we think it could be or based upon perfect conditions. There's single gas monitors that we talked about. Have you guys ever seen them? They're like little pagers, and they're like the carbon monoxide detectors. So we carry them. Adam said a lot of places don't have it, so make sure you check with what your agency does and get to know it. So the single gas ones are like CO monitors. We keep them in our EMS bags. If we walk into a house and it's like, hey, patient has a headache times 2 days in the house or whatever, flu-like symptoms. We get inside, we're like, something's not quite right. We can pull out our monitor since we calibrated that morning and make sure that the atmosphere is good for the patient that we're at, or the patient's house that we're in. When I was down at City, a lot of the captains would take them and clip them to their boots and wear them all day. So no matter what it was on, and if they were somewhere they shouldn't be, it would start beeping, and that actually helped out quite a few times, surprisingly. So those are your single gas monitoring systems, but you're gonna also have to do multiple gas, and you have a bigger device. And the bigger device is capable of reading multiple things at the same time. And it's usually like about this big. And like Adam said, if you don't know it, it lights up and it beeps a lot. Even when you're not around it and it's calibrating all throughout the day or going through its test process, it'll sit there and beep. So we have one, we stuck it by the app bay door, and we take the air unit outside and we run the air unit to fill up to fill up the bottles, and these things would just go off. And everybody would look at it and be like, I didn't touch it. I don't know what's going on with it. And until somebody realized, like, hey, it's next to the app bay, which is, all the exhaust and stuff that's coming up. These suckers are going off because they're detecting high levels. So know where you put them. They're pretty big. They also have some new bases that you can stick them in. You can have people every day calibrate them, but what's wrong with people? Do people know what they're doing all the time? Are people doing it every single day? So if your department has money, you can get auto calibrating systems where you put them in a docking station and they calibrate themselves daily. And if you have to go back to your department and pick some out, you want to make sure that it's portable. Do you want anything you have to plug in, or do you want anything you got to haul in like a cart with you, or on a dolly or with wheels? You want to make sure that it's portable. And have you guys heard of keep it simple, stupid, KISS? So make sure the device you get meets the bare minimums, but doesn't have all the extra fancy gadgets, bells and whistles, because ultimately that's probably something that you're not going to want. It has to have sensitive and reliable data capacities, and it needs to be able to go low on the parts per million. So if you guys look at your sheet right there, do you guys know how to read parts per million? Can you guys decipher what's the higher numbers and what are the lower numbers? Higher numbers are like before the decimal. Decimals are the smaller ones, parts per million. And if you're dealing in parts per million, think about how low that number is already. It needs to be intrinsically safe. Do you guys know what that means from yesterday? Intrinsically safe? Right, it's inherently safe when, right, okay. You guys bored yet? So some guidelines that you have to do. You want to make sure that you text when you go out onto scene that you check the oxygen level first. So based upon calibration, if you test like a toxic gas or something out of order or sequence first, it can throw off the calibration on the instrument itself. So you want to make sure you follow the guidelines of your manufacturer's guidelines. But you want to test the oxygen first, your flammable or combustible levels, and then next you want to test your toxics. Do you guys have any questions? Have you guys all seen these? These monitors, have you guys used them or played with them? Does your department carry them? So you do have them. Who carries them?
Well, you shouldn't play with it. You should train with it.
Train with it, yeah. You gotta train with it, play with it, get familiar with it. Do you guys have, like I heard Adam say, but I didn't see anybody in here say, do you guys have any carbon monoxide detectors, the single gas?
No.
Okay, so you guys could work on getting something small like that in place to begin with. But places that you go will have them. Some private ambulance companies also will carry them. So your startup procedures, generally you're going to come up to you're going to pull it out of the docking station where it's at or the bag that it's kept. You're going to turn it on and it'll go through a system check and have kind of like your SCBA, it'll have like a system of bells and whistles that goes off. And then what you want to do is you want to zero your monitor and you want to do it in a clean and clear atmosphere. You guys have never played with any of these. Can you kind of get what I'm saying with this? So monitoring for oxygen. Your first priority is to do the oxygen as we talked about. And what are, according to your charts right there, what is normal oxygen levels? Where is it safe for you to be without having to monitor your atmosphere?
19.6 and 22.
Okay, and 22 high. So once you go below the 19s right there, that's when it becomes that you need to have some kind of breathing device or something to provide you extra oxygen. Let's see. So when you are thinking about, before you kind of want to know that you want to take out your monitoring device, what are some things that suspect to you to oxygen deficiency? You arrive on scene, what are some first things that would be some indicators for you that it's oxygen deficient? Yeah.
Down animal around the down person.
Okay, that would be something good, because we're talking about like confined space area. So you arrive to a call, you have somebody in a silo, you have somebody down a tube, or you could even say like, you have like a big pit and a horse down next to it. Like, what are you starting to think? Is that going to be your first thing if dispatch doesn't tell you? I probably wouldn't think that. So as you're arriving on scene and you're seeing stuff, when do you start noticing that environments could be oxygen deficient? What? We talked about it already
If they're
before.
in a tank?
Yeah, if they're in a tank, yeah. If there's limited like ventilation, what kind of like container were they working with, or what are they doing? So those are going to be some first things that you start looking for. So that's going to alert you to want to use and pull out your monitor and test for your oxygen levels. So the next thing you're going to want to think about is, hey, if it's deficient in oxygen, well, what could it be rich in? Could it be rich in flammable gases or toxins? And they will all kind of start playing levels and come in together. So you may not know it at the time, but once you pull out your handy-dandy like multiple gas detector, it's this big old thing. You wanna test for oxygen first, and then test for things that usually is seen with a deficiency of oxygen. So say I'm testing a tube that's 20 feet. And I have my detector right here, and all I have is I have a cheap basic design, and here it is right here, and it's a handheld. What's a way that I could lower that or bring it up 20 feet? You can tie it off with a rope, yeah. Yeah, they have some devices that they have that comes probably with the hazmat team for different layers at different levels of feed. But you can, if you're in a pinch and you're not sure and you want to know, you can always tie it off and lower it down the tube. So it is regulated through Cal OSHA that you monitor in the following order. You do your oxygen, you do your LEO, and then you do your toxicity. On your piece of paper where you're gathering all your data and the forms that you're filling out, you want to make sure that you record things like location, time, testing results, name a person who's doing testing results, and the time the testing results came in. You want to note that there's any IDLH, which is immediately dangerous to life and health, what can cause immediate collapse, and things that could have transient effects between 12 and 72 hours later. So just because you're exposed to something doesn't mean you're necessarily going to see it right away. It could take 12 to 72 hours for things to accumulate in your system for you to have effects later on. Generally speaking, you want to start upwind, you want to wear all your PPE, you want to utilize your appropriate PPE. One thing that's not in here is, do you guys all have an ERG book? Okay, so if you don't know what a substance is, or if you know what a substance is, you can deduce by what it is or what it isn't. You want to try to look up what you have, and you want to see what's required to be in the area of what you're working with.
Should get a proper signal.
Oh, son of a.
So you have your site monitoring, and then you have your perimeter monitoring. It's kind of like hazmat, where you have your warm, hot, cold zones. You want to make sure that as things flow, they'll decrease in pollution through dilution. So if you have ventilation and the further away you go, the less susceptible you are to having the higher effects or concentrations of things. And then the stratification of atmospheres. So we talked earlier about atmospheric pressure, and you have air, which is equivalent to 1, and you have things that are lighter than air, and you have things that are heavier than air. So what are some things that are lighter than air?